Welcome, happypreneurs, to the How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs podcast. Today we have Dea Fileva on the show. She has helped countless people overcome ADHD without the use of drugs. And we're going to discuss today how she does this. I'm so fascinated. I cannot wait to hear. Welcome, Dea. How are you?
Thank you, Brett. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me here.
And where in the world are you today?
Right now I'm in Bulgaria, my home country. Sometimes I'm in the UK. I travel a lot these days.
Okay, beautiful. Well, let's jump right in with a hard-hitting question.
Sure.
Most entrepreneurs have ADHD, truth or fiction?
I think it's definitely true. I think there isn't a single entrepreneur or business owner that doesn't have at least an inclination towards ADHD. Maybe they don't know it, maybe they haven't been diagnosed or anything like that, but they would have some of the traits at least for sure. And maybe they would even have the diagnosis, or maybe they never needed to have one because they fulfilled their purpose by being an entrepreneur.
So why is that? What is it about entrepreneurs and ADHD?
It's that creativity. It's that every person with ADHD, first of all, is very, very sensitive and therefore very creative. So those two things are linked. Sensitivity and creativity are linked. And of course, entrepreneurship, having a business, is just as creative as any art. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but I think it's pure art because you create something out of nothing. And so I think to have that drive to be an entrepreneur, you need to be creative and sensitive, and that often goes with ADHD as well. So Dr. Gabramate says that the only thing that's genetic about ADHD is that sensitivity that you're born with, and then it's the environment that creates the ADHD as well. So the ADHD symptoms as well.
Whoa,
So
okay. So you just said a lot right there. I mean, there's so much to unpack. This could be like a 3-hour show, right? But we're gonna try to keep it to 30 minutes. So I believe that entrepreneurs start businesses for a couple reasons. I mean, there's probably unlimited, but the real true ones, for me at least, when I look back, is I started a business because I wanted to make a lot of money because I felt unworthy because of my childhood and my environment, right?
mm,
Secondly, a podcast guest of mine a few episodes ago says that she finds that entrepreneurs start businesses because they want to control things, because they lack control in their childhood, right?
mhm.
So sensitive people often are the ones who are more affected by childhood environment. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely.
So I want you to talk more about, and we both love Gabor Mate. I consider him one of my mentors. I've taken some programs with him. I've read lots of his books. So Gabor Mate says that this isn't a ADHD is not something you were born with. So Dea, can you speak to the sensitivity and why it is that sensitive people are more likely to have ADHD, and then where did that ADHD actually come from?
Yeah, that's a great question that we can definitely discuss for a long time. Especially, when you talk to someone with ADHD, the conversation usually tends to go on for a longer time. Um, what Dr. Gabor says, it's neither the environment nor the genetics. You cannot have ADHD without genetics, without the sensitivity, and you cannot have it without the environment. So you're born with that sensitivity, and then it's the environment that shapes it. And everything you just mentioned, the need to control, the need to prove yourself because potentially you don't feel good enough or worthy enough, right? That comes from an environment that wasn't attentive enough to your needs. What he also says, you probably remember that, is that it's what it really should be called, or what ADHD really stands for, is attention deficit disorder. So you didn't have enough attention growing up, and therefore you constantly crave it as an adult. So I was only diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. I was never diagnosed as a child. Maybe I would have been hadn't been if I had been raised in the Western world, but in my country it really wasn't a thing. But it's that lack of attention growing up. So you try to recreate that. One of my clients said to me just yesterday, I constantly crave that recognition. He's a business owner as well. And he says, I want this because I need the recognition. I want the attention. Some people are being called narcissistic as well in relationships. They come across narcissistic again because they crave that attention. And it really is attention deficit. You are born with a certain level of sensitivity. You are you find yourself in an environment which is not as nurturing as it should be. So every child needs a nurturing, stable, consistent environment, right? A child needs a one primary caregiver at least for the first few years, ideally for the formative years, the first 7 years of their life. And when that is missing, when there is some disconnect, when there is confusion, I love your dog, by the way, amazing. When there is some confusion, when when there is when you don't have that stability in the environment, when you don't have one primary caregiver, let's say you have multiple caregivers. Sometimes lots of people who are adopted have ADHD. A lot of people who have been through, whose parents are divorced or have been through loss, bereavement, and so on. So there's some element of confusion. Whenever I speak to clients, there's always an element of confusion, something that doesn't make sense to a child's brain. So you have that sensitivity that you're born with, coupled with an environment where something didn't go quite right, which is not stable, which is not safe and secure. And then you and that creates the creates potentially can create ADHD. So when I say potentially, somebody may ask, so why does it create it in some cases, in some cases it doesn't? To me, it's about the coping mechanism that one chooses. So some people may develop OCD, for example. Again, OCD, as we know, as you and I both know, is about the need to control. So it's, that's your coping mechanism. That's your way of coping with an environment that isn't perfect, that doesn't make sense, that isn't, that a child cannot cope with. ADHD to me is about escaping to the head, hence the inattentive that develops, or escaping, bouncing off the walls, being hyperactive, or both. But it's escaping, it's fragmenting your mind so that you can really survive an argument, survive abuse, survive loss, survive divorce, etc., etc., survive that lack of caring and nurturing, that lack of attunement. Sometimes it's just about a lack of attunement within the parent and the child. It doesn't mean the parent is incapable or ill-intentioned. Sometimes just about the circumstances. A preoccupied parent, a very anxious parent, can also create the circumstances for ADHD to develop because there's lack of proper attunement and attachment.
So Gabor talks about disassociation being a part of ADHD, and to me, it really makes sense that if a child is going through a real painful experience, that they don't want to pay attention to that experience, so their brain
Exactly.
does what it was formed to do, and it did its job, and it basically checks out, right? So it checks
Exactly.
out from this bad thing that's happening, and so now your brain is programmed to check out, and we as adults just stay checked out. I've never been formally diagnosed either, but I had a chemistry teacher that I can remember this like it was yesterday. He's like, Brad, you have a 3 second attention span. And as a joke, I was the class clown. So I was like, wait, what did you say? I forgot what you just said. But I'm all over the place. And I certainly through business, I've had a lot of ups and downs because I'm all over the place. And I still find myself doing one task and then something comes up and I've got to tell myself, like, no, don't get distracted. So
Yeah.
I'm probably one of those sensitive people as well. It's just amazing when you hear genetics. I think people want to go to, and we'll get to the dopamine thing in a second, but I think people want to go to the genetics are something wrong with my brain. Well, being sensitive is nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your brain. It's just a characteristic. It's a gene. It's a trait that you have, right? That you're more sensitive than others. That sensitivity opens you up to so many things, ADHD, but it also affects how you deal with trauma and stress as a child, right? Do you remember the study that Gabor talked about where they were trying to find a trait of super aggressive people and they found something and they're like, I think we've got it. I think we've got it. But then they looked in the least aggressive people and that trait was shown too. In the mid-level people, it wasn't. And guess what that trait was? It was sensitivity. So he's
Mm.
like, our prisons are full. You've got these guys, these big brawly guys with tattoos that look tough. They're our prisons are full of a bunch of really sensitive people who the trauma affected them more than the kid who didn't have that sensitivity, trait.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Exactly, exactly. And that sensitivity, that resilience that, some people don't understand when I try to explain ADHD and they say, well, but, everybody experiences trauma in their life, everybody experiences hardships, and then you just deal with it. And that's exactly the thing. Some of us cannot just deal with it, at least not until we heal and we start to develop that resilience. That child who's hypersensitive and who lacks that nurturing environment doesn't develop that resilience. And again, Cabramatta says, it's not the trauma isn't what happens outside of you. It's not the event. It's not the abuse. It's not the whatever happens outside of you. It's what happens inside of you. And what happens inside of you as a result of the event, as a result of the external event, as a result of how you were born, but also how other people helped you deal with your feelings. A small child cannot deal with their own feelings, so that's why they need that primary caregiver. That's why they need to learn that attunement and attachment. They need to learn to cope with their feelings. When that isn't there, when there isn't a parent who is consistently helping them deal with their feelings, when they're left to their own devices, or when the feelings are shut down, don't worry about it. Oh, it's not that bad. That distraction, that denial of feelings, that all leads to lack of resilience, because you start suppressing yourself. You start doubting yourself. That's what everybody with ADHD has, trust issues as well, or
And
almost everybody. Let's not be. Yeah.
as Dr. Gabor says, he says kids misbehave for one reason and one reason only, and it's lack of connection. So
Yeah.
if you have a child that has ADHD or other behavioral problems and you want to figure out where it's coming from, take your spouse and walk into the bathroom and look in the mirror, because there's a really, really good chance that you're the cause of it. I know that looking back at my son's anxiety and my daughter's behavioral issues, her mom and me were the cause of it.
Mm.
If you're giving your child everything you need, and by the way, I thought I was giving them everything I needed because I was a single dad for 11 years. I did everything for my kids. I give them love. I cooked them breakfast. I was at every volleyball game. But because of my unworthiness and the feelings of not being good enough, I could not give them everything that they needed. So when I look back now, I can say this, because I have compassion for myself, because I was doing the best I can. But my kids have behavioral problems because of me. If your kids have behavioral problems and ADHD and, oh my God, my kids are driving me crazy, well, guess why they're driving you crazy? They're driving you crazy because of your behavior, and they lack connection from you, and they want connection. So how do you get connection? You spend time with them. When they misbehave, punishment doesn't work. Spanking is about the worst thing you can do. The second worst thing you can do is put them in timeout, because why are they misbehaving? They're
Probably the
disconnected.
first, I would
Are,
say.
are you going to further disconnect them by putting them in an isolated place? It doesn't work. So connect with your kids and love them the best that you can.
Yeah. Absolutely. I would even say that's I would even swap those two around, giving time out. So, because that's that lack of connection. That's probably the worst thing, because sometimes mental, emotional mistreatment, I wouldn't call it abuse, but let's say kind of lack of connection is even worse than
It'd be
anything
worse
that's
than
physical.
physical.
It's
Yeah.
much worse.
Yeah.
And I just want to kind of make a note for parents there, because I think a lot of people start when you say, I absolutely agree with you, by the way. I absolutely agree with you. And when you understand, when you take responsibility for what you have been through, you have the ability to stop that intergenerational trauma, as we call it, right? And it didn't start with you, which is actually another great book. It didn't start with you. It started, I mean, whose fault is it, right? Is it your parents or their parents before that? It said it goes 14 generations back. But once you take responsibility for your own healing, then you have the ability to stop that passing it on to your kids. And very often it's not about abuse, it's not about even neglect and so on. It's like you said, it's about feeling, because you feel unworthy, you feel disconnected from yourself, you cannot create that connection with your kids. And it's not about blaming anyone. It's about taking responsibility. My own parents have often felt like I've blamed them and so on, but it's about taking that responsibility and saying, okay, this is what I've done, but you can always change that.
So blaming yourself, Daya, actually makes things worse. And here's why. I recognize that I didn't do what I could have done as a parent, but I didn't know better. I did the best I could do with the awareness. If I was sitting here today saying I was a shitty dad, woe is me, I would be personally attacking myself and keeping me in that trauma of old. So this is never about blaming you. When I say go look in the bathroom mirror, if you want to figure out the cause of your kids' problems. That doesn't mean I'm saying you're bad, just the
Mm,
opposite. Saying, I
yeah.
know you're doing the best you can do. And if you want to do the best thing that you can do for your kids, stop blaming yourself and change your behavior now instead of waiting another 10 or 20 years.
Mm. Exactly, exactly. So, exactly. And awareness is always the first step. It's like I say in my book, awareness is the first step, commitment to the process is the second step, and the third step is healing. You have to be willing to look deep inside yourself and heal your own wounds before you can help anybody else.
Yeah, it's the
So
old
I hope this message goes out not just to current parents, but to future parents as well. Ideally, you want to do that work before you have children of your own.
yes,
You have that.
yes, yes, yes. Because as Gabor's taught us, the imprint in the subconscious mind actually starts to form and have memories in the first trimester, or excuse me, in the third trimester. So when they're in the womb, they're actually being affected by, if the mother has stress or even the husband has stress, there's cortisol levels that are going into the fetus that are affecting the development of the brain. So if you're a new parent and you're not worthy, and by the way, if you want to figure out if you're worthy or not, do you have self-love, go to bradchandler.com/quiz and take this quiz to see if you have self-love. If you don't have self-love, and you can pause on the pregnancy, do the work, because your child will be so much better if you have your child without all the stress of feeling this trauma that you haven't dealt with as a child.
Yeah, absolutely. ADHD has been shown to be correlated with stress in the third trimester, like you said, in the last months of pregnancy. And it makes so much sense if you think about it, because it's all about that prefrontal cortex not developing properly, which leads to executive functioning issues, attention, emotional regulation, and all of that. And that the brain develops sequentially. So in the final months, that part will develop. And then when you have stress, it doesn't develop properly. Like you said, high levels of cortisol. What ADHD really is all about is that being in that constant fight or flight. And when you first become aware, commit to healing, and then you start healing yourself through whatever methodology you choose. And in my view, it has to be something that deals with the subconscious mind always. Um, then you literally relax the nervous system. So yeah, that constant fight or flight mode of something being hyper vigilant. People with ADHD are always hyper vigilant because you're in that fight or flight. You expect something to happen. You expect your happiness to be interrupted. Very often when I review different scenes, as we call them in RHT, different childhood memories with clients, there's always a scene where they were happy. Let's say they were driving in a car going to a beautiful family trip, and all of a sudden, bam, something happens. You know, parents are fighting. Next thing you know, they're getting a divorce. Their happiness interrupted. So they developed this idea that their happiness could be taken away any moment. And then what's the point of being happy? What's the point of focusing on anything? There's no time for anything. There's always this rushedness. There's always this impatience to get things done because you never know what's going to happen. So there's always an element of confusion, number one, and there's always an element of that fear that your happiness will be taken away any moment. And also, thirdly, you're in that constant fight or flight mode.
So Dea, let's talk about if someone has ADHD. Let's talk about how can it be fixed? What does Western medicine love to do, and what have you found is a better alternative?
Well, we know what Western medicine loves to do, right? There's a pill for everything. And by the way, just a disclaimer, anybody listens to this and they are already taking pills and they hear this, what I'm about to say, and what we talk about, when I think both stand for, I don't think anybody should just go and stop their pills cold turkey, because that can have detrimental effects. Some of my clients have felt better after our sessions, and then they want to stop the drugs because literally they don't need them. But stopping cold turkey can be very, very, very painful. Not just whatever medication you may be on, anti-depression, anti-anxiety, anti-ADHD, and sometimes we can talk about that as well. They are related. So yes, for ADHD, what's usually prescribed are stimulant medications such as Ritalin, such as Elvans and Vivans. So they have different times of half-life and different kind of, they're long-lasting or short-lasting. They're also non-stimulant medications. Sometimes also SSRI, antidepressant medication, are prescribed for for ADHD as well. But usually, you get prescribed Ritalin or something like that, a stimulant medication. That's what I got at first. And it helps to an extent. It does help you focus. I cannot say it does not help you focus, but what most people report is that sometimes you can be focusing on the wrong thing. So it helps you focus, but that's about it. Maybe it helps you be more kind of controlled and more less emotional because it activates the prefrontal cortex. That's what it does. It raises dopamine and norepinephrine, which is considered to be the main cause of ADHD, that insufficient or inconsistency in dopamine and norepinephrine levels. So when you take a stimulant medication, you actually counterintuitively you calm down. I've experienced it myself. Many people experience that same effect. Some people are hypersensitive to stimulants, so they cannot even take medication. But that's the standard. Most people, when they go and get a diagnosis from a psychiatrist, they get prescribed medication, stimulant medication, and it works for a while, and for a while you can even feel that you're on top of the world, everything's fine, but then you find out that it doesn't really solve the problem. Again, it just puts a patch on the wound. Also, many people tend to abuse medication because it feels great. It gives you a high. It literally gives you this sense of well-being and a high. It raises all the good stuff in your brain, like I said, dopamine, norepinephrine. So, a lot of people, even if they never abused any other drugs, they abuse it. And speaking of that, a lot of people before they get the diagnosis, before they get diagnosed, they abuse or they self-medicate, as we call it, self-medicate on non-prescription drugs, because
Or
again,
how about marijuana?
Marijuana is a depressant. So we have two types of street drugs, right? Stimulants and depressants. So alcohol is a depressant to some extent. Actually, it's both stimulant and depressant. Marijuana is a depressant, so it calms you down. I think some do, but most people, because of that hyperactivity in the brain, they actually want to they want to stimulate the brain. We need that stimulation because we don't have enough dopamine. So most people would self-medicate on cocaine or something like that, something that is a stimulant, rather than some people. It depends. I think it depends on the individual. Yeah.
So Western medicine, they love to diagnose, label, and then give a drug, right? In this case, I think if I went to today to be diagnosed, a doctor might say you have low dopamine levels, and therefore we've got to give you Ritalin, and Ritalin
Mm.
will increase your dopamine levels,
Yeah.
and then you'll be fine. Is that the problem with the ADHD? Is it low dopamine levels? And if not, like how can you fix it?
I think the problem with most things that we deal with, if not everything, is that, again, that lack of attunement, that childhood trauma that we go through. And when I say trauma, I don't mean big abuse. Some of my clients, they come to me and they say, well, nothing really, and I was the same, nothing really major happened to me. I wasn't abused. There was no physical or sexual abuse. There was nothing like that. Nothing out of the ordinary. That's what most people think.
I hear that every single day, Dea. Every single 9 out of 10 of my clients are like, "No, I don't know why I'd be this way because my childhood was great." And then
Yeah.
15 minutes, and I'm like, "No, your childhood wasn't great."
Exactly, because most people think, or at least they used to think, that providing financially, just having all the material things is enough. But actually, all a child needs that attention, that true, genuine attention, understanding. A lot of people with ADHD feel misunderstood. There is this, again, the element of confusion, misunderstanding, lack of attunement. Denying your emotions, and that is a childhood trauma. So the path to changing that and the path to calming down the brain while still maintaining that creativity and sensitivity and drive to do something is to heal. you know um, Sometimes when people start with medication, for example, they actually fear that they're going to lose that creativity. So it's maybe the same with people who start on their healing journey. They think, oh well, but if I heal and if I calm down, will I lose that drive to succeed, or that sensitivity or that creativity I have? No, I think you would always maintain it. In fact, I became more creative the more I worked on myself, um, because I
So,
had
so
actually suppressed all that.
So tell us about yourself. Like were you on Ritalin, and were you diagnosed with ADHD? Did you say as an adult?
I was diagnosed when I was 29, almost 30,
Okay.
a few years ago, and I never, in a million years, would have thought that I have ADHD because I was one of the, if not the best in my school for a long time, for most of my school years. And yeah, and that's well, actually, a friend of mine suggested that I may have it. I had a period of intense stress, both personal, relationship drama, related to work. It was just a huge mess. Mess. The word mess is something you will hear all the time when you work with ADHD, right? There's always the ADHD brain is accustomed to chaos, and that's how I was as well. In fact, when something is in chaos, we get bored. When there isn't enough stimulation, we get bored. So after that period of intense stress, my brain almost stopped functioning. So the executive functioning, which is already compromised in the ADHD brain, got even worse. What I believe happened, what my amygdala was so hyperactive for such a long time, potentially I probably developed more adrenaline receptors as well. And when that all subsided, something went wrong. I couldn't make a simple decision. I couldn't, I literally mean simple decisions like, do I make my coffee first? Do I get the milk out of the fridge?
Wow.
What do I do? What do I wear? So I really couldn't function. And I've always been very logical, very analytical. And so I thought, okay, there's something wrong with me. So I started seeking help. I went to my GP. I got an anxiety diagnosis. For just 5, 10, maybe 10 minutes, I spent in his office, and he gave me SSRI for anxiety. And then a friend of mine suggested I'm actually have ADHD. To which, of course, I said, I crazy. I thought people with ADHD are not successful, not, I don't know. I was a good student. If anything, I thought at least you're kind of the hyperactive kid who never sits still and so on. But okay, I thought I was willing to I'll try anything. I went, I got the diagnosis, I got Ritalin. I felt amazing. I was able to focus. I was able to do so many things. So I would still be fast and multitasking, but I would be more sequential, I guess, in the things that I would do. That's what medication does help with. But then at some point, maybe 6 months down the line, I found myself on the full range of modern day medication, like as I call it, SSRI, Ritalin, even I think Valium for anxiety.
Wow.
I still had some kind of panic, and it felt that I had to take this to function. And I said to myself, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, just to be able to function, to stay in a job. I was still working in the corporate world, to stay in a job which doesn't satisfy me. Although I found a new job, I got a pay raise. So again, the medication puts a patch on the wound, and you may function better for a little while, but it doesn't solve the problem. And so one day I thought, I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. And I kind of really wanted to find an answer. And, the universe responded. And then I found another psychiatrist who was also an EFT, emotional freedom technique practitioner, a psychologist, absolutely amazing individual. And he helped me deal with the trauma I had as an adult. And from then on, I was hooked. I felt so different within days. And I thought, the world has to know about this, first of all. Secondly, I started experimenting with self-healing, self-hypnosis. I didn't even know what I was doing at the time, but I
Dea, you mentioned trauma as an adult. You meant trauma as a child?
say again.
You said trauma as an adult. Did you mean to
Initially,
say?
initially, initially, we worked on adult trauma I had, but then
Okay.
I knew, I mean, I had a feeling that there was something much, much deeper, and that came later on. That part of the healing came maybe when I discovered RTT, um, rapid transformational therapy. Yeah, I that's when I really, really dug deep into my childhood. I started remembering things. Again, many people with ADHD do not remember a lot of their childhood, either because, like, again, nothing much happened, or because it was so painful that you had to repress it. So many people would say,
Because you broke up a little bit. People that don't remember their childhood, it was so uneventful, or there were such painful things that they had to
exactly,
repress.
exactly, exactly. So it's one or the other. And lots of people, I mean, as you know, not just ADHD, but with trauma in general, that's why all these things are so similar, right? People don't remember. So my first experience was with EFT. I worked on adult trauma I had, but I knew that linked to something deeper. I knew it linked to a childhood trauma I had. So I started experimenting, researching NLP, EFT. Then I came across RTT. I finally became a practitioner a few years ago of RTT, EFT, and NLP. But
Wow.
even before that, I was researching, and it's been a constant self development in the last years. And sometimes I'm sure you've experienced that as well, Brad. You think, oh, okay, I'm fixed now, I feel great, and then there's something else, and something else, and something else. It's that constant work on yourself that leads you to become a more fulfilled, happier individual, right? And that constant understanding of what it is that happen. And with ADHD, again, there are many different things. It's not one thing. It's usually not one major event or a sequence of kind of the same events. It's usually a combination of factors. That's why the brain is so confused, so fragmented. It really is a fragmentation of the brain, right?
So tell us. So number one, you're not on any drugs right now, and you're functioning great. Is
No,
that just okay? If someone
that's
is an
right.
if anyone's listening to this who is struggling with ADHD or thinks they have ADHD and they don't want to go the traditional, Western medicine route of drugs, what should they do?
Heal. Always heal. So again, um, first step is awareness, and talking therapy can help for that, reading self-help books, meditation, body work. But at some point you actually need to fix what went wrong. You need to understand the trauma and change it, reframe it. So for me, I use a combination of RTT, EFT, rapid transformational therapy, emotional freedom technique, some NLP techniques, breath work, meditation. I combine body work because the trauma, as we know, stays in the body. So something that works with the body is important as well. It's not just in the mind, it's a combination of mind and body, and even spiritual development, if you wish.
So
Finding
so
your purpose is a big part of it as well. Finding something, if you're not an entrepreneur already, or maybe you are in business but you're not doing what you love, finding what you truly love is really important, because that's what's going to drive you every day. And then the
so so
final.
so isn't finding your purpose super hard though when you're in this fight or flight state? That's what I've found. It's nearly impossible. So when you do the work that you're suggesting, when you say EFT or RTT, which is rapid transformational therapy, isn't the core of it going back to those traumatic event? Because the trauma, like you said, is the story we tell ourselves, identifying that story that we've told ourselves for all these years and then reversing it through neuroplasticity. Can you just talk about a little bit of what goes on in the RTT session with the hypnosis and the recording and everything, so people can understand what you and I both do for a living?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So a big part for me, my favorite part, is understanding. I think a lot of us live in the state of, again, of confusion. So the RTT starts with um, remembering those childhood memories, not always childhood memories, but very often childhood memories, sometimes before birth as well. A lot of the times people remember things or can feel or sense things from, starting from the womb. um, so remembering those childhood memories, is the first step. Understanding what happened, and then reframing the events, because again, like we said earlier, it's not about what happened to you, it's how you interpreted it, what happened inside of you. And we changed that with RTT. And then the last part is what we call the transformation, which is all the positive beliefs. The ADHD brain, when we get to a point that we seek a diagnosis, or that we suffer or struggle, feel empty and kind of broken inside, so to speak, that's because of all the negative self-talk. I used to tell myself horrible things, that I'm unhappy, I'm depressed, I hate this and I hate that. That's how I used to talk to myself years and years ago.
Me too.
And even just changing that will help already. Even just changing that self-talk, being aware of that self-talk. Another great book, by the way, how to talk to yourself, uh, is a great step that you can already do for yourself. But of course, having a session, an RTT session, where you actually remember things that you may have long forgotten, which is what usually happens, and having that insight of, oh, that's why I'm like this. That's the beauty of it. For me, that's the most beautiful part. Oh, that insight of, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's why I do this. That's why I think like this. That's why I
all
cannot focus.
all
Yeah.
change begins with awareness. That's the up on the screen right now. So Dea, as we close out, part of title to this podcast is A Genius in Disguise. Can you tell us what that means, a genius in ADHD, a genius in disguise?
I love calling ADHD a genius in disguise because, first of all, so many famous people, including Richard Branson, he's a UK entrepreneur, including famous musicians, including people who, all these people diagnosed with ADHD, or it's said that they would have been diagnosed, had it been available at the time, such as Einstein um, and I think President Lincoln and so on. So many people are said to either have been or would have been diagnosed with ADHD. Brilliant people. And that's genius, right? But I say genius in disguise because the disguise is a trauma. Usually we reach a point of diagnosis because we experience the side effects. The problem is not the ADHD. The problem is not the distractibility, the forgetfulness. I still forget things, but I have an assistant. I have a calendar. I put things down and people remind me of things. I have a system in place as well, which is also a part of managing but it's also part of healing and of getting better. But the problem is the negative self-talk, the self-criticism, the lack of praise, not loving, not feeling worthy. And therefore, because of that, people develop anxiety, depression, OCD and mood swings and all of that. And that's the real problem. So that's the disguise. And once you heal the disguise, once you heal the trauma, you let the genius, which is the creativity, come out. And then you can create something. Whether you want to be a musician, an inventor, creator, business owner, entrepreneur of any sort, that's genius. Because
So you help people on a daily basis go from where you were on all these drugs and ADHD, controlling your life, to no drugs and having a great life, right? How do people? What's the best way for people to reach you, Daya?
people can contact me on Facebook. I think you have that somewhere written. It's Dea Fileva, that's DEA Fileva. Or they can also email me at dea@deafileva.com. They can also visit my website, which is also deafileva.com. So any of those works. I'm very happy to be friends with anyone, just chat. Anyone who wants to, to seek some advice. I also have a free Facebook group. So once we connect, they can join that. They can join that too, and I'll be happy to see them there. I post tips on healing. There's many other things that can be done, including, you mentioned drugs before. I take supplements that do help with brain functioning as well. So there are many ways to help to turn ADHD into a superpower, which is the name of my group. But the main one is healing, and we talked about that already. So yeah, that's
Beautiful. So if you like the show, please go ahead and subscribe and share it and like whatever you can do. We have a Facebook group called How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs, and that can be found at bradchandler.com/Facebook. That's a great group for entrepreneurs. And Dea, thank you so much. This was an awesome podcast. I thank you so much for your time. Is there anything that we forgot to ask you think is super important to tell the listeners before we go?
Thank you, Brett, for having me here. I really enjoy this. And again, I'm so passionate about this, that, about turning ADHD into a superpower. I think we covered most of it. I'm sure we can go on forever, but I think we covered most of it. I think maybe the most important thing to remember, if that I would love anyone to take away from this, is that it's not about managing ADHD or beating it or putting it down. It's about turning it into a superpower. And maybe one thing I forgot to mention is that if you are about to get a diagnosis, you have just received a diagnosis, what's really important is to move away from it. So what I mean by that is it helps initially, it helps to explain it. Again, yes, a genius in disguise. So when I first got a diagnosis, I felt like everything just made sense. Like, no, why did no one tell me this before? I felt normal. I no longer felt like a square peg in a round hole. But the truth is that you are a square peg in a round hole, and that's great. And why are you trying to fit in when you're born to stand out? So that's what I would like to end with. Just remember, you're born to stand out.
All right, that was awesome. Thank you. That was another edition of How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs, and we'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Love heals all.